Welcome back to Horror Hues, your one-stop destination for all things suspenseful and chilling. If you have a taste for terror and a fascination with fear, you're in the right place. Today, we dive into a horrifying tale of survival and bravery in the face of an unspeakable nightmare. Grab your courage, and join us as we step into the doomed town of Harrowsfield. Remember, in the world of Horror Hues, the darkness is always closer than you think. Let's begin. The town of Harrowsfield was the epitome of ordinary, a smudge of civilization comfortably nestled between dense forests and the sweeping expanse of Lake Marin. Here, life was a humdrum of small-town mundanity, the sort of place where neighbors knew each other by name and generations of families created woven histories and vibrant tapestries of connection. Among the familiar faces was Lena Morrison, a compassionate local nurse with a nurturing soul and dreams of a simple, fulfilling life. Her days revolved around caring for the townsfolk at Harrowsfield's only medical center, with her evenings spent cozily with her aging father and her playful Labrador, Max. However, one frigid Tuesday morning in December, Lena's routine shattered. A school bus driver came in with a high fever, bloodshot eyes, and an inexplicable aggression. This was no ordinary flu. Lena, with her years of experience, sensed something was profoundly wrong, but she couldn't place her finger on it. As more townsfolk began pouring into the medical center with similar symptoms, a creeping dread began to settle in her heart. Word of the strange sickness spread through Harrowsfield like wildfire. The town was thrown into a state of quiet panic. Yet, most alarmingly, the symptoms seemed to rapidly escalate. Affected individuals became violently irrational, with an almost animalistic strength that was difficult to contain. 3 days into the mysterious outbreak, Lena's father fell ill. His usual sprightly eyes were now a dull, bloodshot red, his body unnaturally hot, and a primal aggression had replaced his usual gentle demeanor. Lena, terrified but determined, locked him in his room, promising him through her tears that she would find a cure. News from the outside world was scarce. The town seemed to have been inexplicably cut off from the rest of the world, the roads blockaded by unknown forces. Isolated and desperate, Lena could do nothing but watch as the life she knew started spiraling into a haunting nightmare. Then came the missing persons reports. First, it was old Mrs. Henderson from the bakery, then young Billy Thompson, the school's star quarterback. The town was besieged by a wave of dread that was almost palpable. Life in Harrowsfield had taken a dark turn, and Lena couldn't shake off the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Little did she know how right she was. That fateful night, leaving the medical center, Lena heard a low growl from the shadows. Turning around, she saw the bus driver who was her first patient, his face grotesquely deformed, eyes glowing in eerie red, a guttural growl echoing from his throat. Before she could react, he lunged at her, no longer the friendly man who waved at her every morning but a horrifying creature born of nightmares. As Lena stared into his monstrous visage, she knew, life in Harrowsfield would never be the same again. Lena barely escaped the encounter with the monstrous version of the bus driver, a sprint of terror that ended only when she locked herself inside her house. Gasping for breath, she leaned against the door, her mind spinning in chaotic disbelief. She looked towards her father's room, the ominous silence only adding to her growing terror. In the ensuing days, the once familiar streets of Harrowsfield were transformed into a labyrinth of fear. A fear that wasn't nameless anymore. Zombies. The once cordial neighbors, friends, family, they were becoming something else. At first, denial took root in the town, a desperate attempt to rationalize the horrifying reality. But soon, denial gave way to desperate acceptance. The church, once a beacon of faith and solace, had its doors locked. Houses were barricaded, the once friendly town eerily silent, and the hospital was inundated with terrified citizens seeking refuge. As the nights grew longer, the howls of the infected echoed through the quiet, once sleepy streets. Lena, using her home as a temporary shelter, watched as the once warm and inviting town transformed into a chilling hellscape. Each sunset marked the beginning of a dreadful vigil as she fought to keep the monstrous beings at bay while tending to the sick and the injured. In the chilling glow of her lone lantern, she scoured medical journals, desperately searching for a solution. She quickly realized the enormity of the situation. The virus was unlike anything she had seen or studied. Each symptom was more horrifying than the next, ending with the victim's transformation into a bloodthirsty creature. She couldn't shake the image of her father, locked in his room, his muffled groans a constant reminder of the relentless epidemic. Her heart ached with the dread of what he might become, fueling her determination to find a cure. One fateful night, as the wails of the infected echoed hauntingly outside, Lena spotted a pattern in the progression of the disease. Certain blood types appeared more resistant, not immune, but took longer to transform. A glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. Could this be the key to a cure? However, her moment of revelation was short-lived as a horrifying scream echoed from her father's room. Rushing to his side, Lena was met with a sight that would forever be seared into her memory. Her father, the gentle soul who had raised her, had transformed into one of them, a hideous parody of the man he once was. Lena stumbled back in horror, tears streaming down her face. As she stared into the blood-red eyes of the creature that was once her father, the reality of her situation crashed down on her. Lena was not just fighting for her survival, she was fighting for her town, her home, and the memory of her father. The fight was personal now. And she was far from ready to give up. Following the harrowing encounter with her father, Lena experienced a rush of desperate urgency. She knew she had to find a solution before the virus claimed any more of the people she cared about. The correlation between blood types and the speed of transformation was her only lead, and she clung to it like a lifeline in a storm. Days melded into nights as she immersed herself in research, experimenting with the few samples she had, pushing the limits of her knowledge and creativity. Harrowsfield became a backdrop of distant screams and echoing howls, but within the walls of her makeshift lab, Lena was ablaze with desperate determination. A breakthrough came when she discovered an anomaly in the blood sample of Mr. O'Connor, the town's librarian and a notoriously resilient octogenarian. His blood seemed to be fighting the infection, albeit slowly. It wasn't a cure, but it was hope, a starting point to potentially slow the virus and buy them time. Meanwhile, the world outside was evolving into a gruesome battleground. Survivors barricaded themselves in homes, while others made the dangerous trip to the hospital, seeking protection. Lena's house became a beacon of hope, a sanctuary where survivors gathered, hoping to find safety and answers. With a handful of town members at her side, including the fiercely protective Sheriff Collins and the resourceful mechanic, Sarah, Lena began to strategize. They needed more resources, more time, and a safe haven to work on the potential cure. A plan started to take form. They would need to venture to the hospital, the heart of the chaos, to gather any remaining medical supplies. The hospital, now a haunting edifice infested with the infected, stood as a grim reminder of their lost normalcy. It was a dangerous mission, but their only hope. Sarah, using her mechanical expertise, fortified a school bus, outfitting it with a reinforced exterior and barricaded windows. Sheriff Collins, despite his gruff exterior, diligently trained the survivors in self-defense. He instilled in them a sense of courage and unity, despite the horror that awaited them. They prepared for their impending journey, haunted by the eerie moans that echoed through the ghostly town. The specter of their friends and neighbors, now monstrous beings, loomed over them, a chilling reminder of the stakes. In the quiet before their departure, Lena found herself looking at a photo of her father. Her heart ached with loss, but his smiling face also kindled a spark of determination in her. She wasn't just doing this for her survival, but for him, for their neighbors, and for the town that had been their home. As they prepared to step into the nightmare that awaited them, they were not just survivors anymore, but fighters. Their small town had become a battleground, and they were ready to reclaim it, one horrifying step at a time. The journey to the hospital was a gauntlet of horrors. They navigated the streets of Harrowsfield, now eerily silent except for the grotesque growls of the infected. Buildings stood abandoned, cars lay deserted, and the remnants of life as it once was served as a chilling reminder of their lost peace. The fortified school bus provided them a degree of safety, but the sight of their neighbors and friends, now unrecognizable creatures of nightmares, was a psychological battle. Yet, they pressed on, their resolve hardened by the grim determination to reclaim their town. As they neared the hospital, the presence of the infected grew denser. The sight of the once comforting hospital, now overrun by creatures, struck a cold dread in their hearts. Yet, Lena, driven by her desperation and determination, led the way. Sheriff Collins, stern and unwavering, commanded their defense, while Sarah navigated the bus through the hordes with a precision only a lifelong mechanic could manage. The battle to get inside was horrific. The infected swarmed them, their monstrous growls echoing off the hospital's concrete walls. Yet the survivors fought, their fear overpowered by their determination, their every swing and shot a defiance of the nightmare that had enveloped them. Inside the hospital, the scene was a grim tableau of the apocalypse. Overturned furniture, deserted hallways, and the haunting stillness were evidence of a swift and overwhelming invasion. The medical supplies they desperately needed were still there, untouched amidst the chaos. As they gathered the materials, the infected were relentless. The hospital's close quarters made the encounters terrifyingly personal. Every corner turned could mean a face-to-face confrontation with a former friend or loved one. Yet, they pressed on, a unified front against the horror. The return journey was equally perilous. With their precious cargo of medical supplies, they had to protect not just their lives, but their hope for a cure. Their passage attracted more of the infected, their monstrous faces illuminated in the stark, artificial bus light. Yet, even in the face of terrifying odds, they persevered. As the fortified school bus rolled to a stop outside Lena's house, a sense of exhausted triumph washed over them. They had faced the horror and survived, a small but significant victory. Inside, the collected samples and equipment were a beacon of hope. Lena felt a surge of determination. They had a fighting chance. Despite the horrors they had faced and those yet to come, they held on to their hope. It was a beacon in the darkness, guiding them, driving them. As they patched their wounds and fortified their sanctuary, their spirits were battered but unbroken. The nightmare was far from over, but they had taken a crucial step towards ending it. Exhausted yet hopeful, they readied themselves for what lay ahead. The fight for Harrowsfield was just beginning. In the relative safety of their fortified home, Lena set to work with renewed vigor. With the new resources from the hospital, she dove into the creation of a possible cure, drawing on every ounce of her medical knowledge. Hours turned into days as she toiled tirelessly, while Sheriff Collins and Sarah took turns defending their refuge, keeping the infected at bay. The screams and howls from the outside world became a grim soundtrack to their desperate attempts to find a cure. As days passed, Lena saw progress. Mr. O'Connor's resilient blood, when combined with certain drugs, showed a promising reaction. The cells began to fight back, trying to repel the infection. It was far from a perfected cure, but it was the closest thing they had. Once she had a potential antidote, Lena faced a painful decision. She needed a live test subject. And she knew, her father was the only available option. Swallowing her dread, she made her way to her father's room. The man who had raised her, loved her, now lay in a monstrous state. As she administered the makeshift cure, her hand trembled. Hours turned into a day, then two. And then, something remarkable happened. Her father's red eyes faded slightly, and the aggression subsided. The cure was working. It wasn't a complete transformation, but he was more himself than he had been in days. Word of the partial success spread among the survivors. Their exhausted, fearful faces lit up with a spark of hope. For the first time since the horror began, they saw a possibility of survival, of reclaiming their lives from the nightmare. Emboldened by their newfound hope, they began planning their next move. They needed to mass-produce the cure, distribute it, and reclaim Harrowsfield. Lena couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism. They were far from safe, but they were closer to a solution than ever before. However, their moment of triumph was short-lived. As they gathered around their rudimentary strategy table, a terrifying sound echoed through the silent night. The sound was not the usual moans and growls of the infected but a deafening, horrifying roar. They rushed to the barricades, their hearts pounding in their chests. What they saw made their blood run cold. An immense horde of infected was heading their way, unlike anything they had faced before. At the helm was a creature that was horrifyingly different, towering above the rest, its roars echoing through the silent town. As the chilling cliffhanger hung in the air, Lena gripped the vial of cure tighter. The battle for Harrowsfield was far from over. The worst was yet to come, and they had to be ready. The future of their town, their lives, rested on their ability to fight back the horrifying tide. The screen darkened, leaving the viewers with bated breath, waiting for what the next chapter in the harrowing tale of survival would bring. Their fight had just begun. The battle for Harrowsfield was about to reach its terrifying peak. And there you have it, brave souls, another terrifying chapter from the pages of Horror Hues. Will Lena and her band of survivors reclaim their town from the undead? Can they hold on to their humanity amidst the horror? You'll have to stay tuned to find out. Before you return to the safety of the mundane, remember to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Don't miss out on any of the chilling tales we have in store for you. And we'd love to hear what you thought of today's nightmare. Drop a comment below, share with fellow horror aficionados, and don't forget to like this video. Until our next eerie adventure, remember, every shadow hides a story, and every nightfall, a nightmare. Stay brave, stay curious, and keep watching Horror Hues. Good night.